So we're going to start with a little bit of storytelling. Magatte's going to tell a short version of her story of how she got into this, and then I'll connect with how I got into this movement. Then we'll talk about Próspera and the Próspera model, how I would say radical it is, innovative it is, frontier it is, and why we believe it's a very powerful solution for Africa, and a little bit about where we are in terms of setting up some Próspera zones in Africa. Without further ado, I'll let you give your story.
Thank you, Michael. And again, you heard that we're married, so if you see some weird dynamic going on, it's just the normal state of our lives. People are always like, how long have you guys been married? We're like 17 years, and they think we've been married just yesterday. And that's the beauty of being married to somebody with whom you share your life's mission and purpose, and you share more than love, you share admiration, and you share respect. So I wish you all a similar relationship. With that being said, so on the story, the reason why I wanted to share that with you is I did not come to this field, I did not come to these ideas because I read on some books, about economics or anything like that. I came to this thing through my lived experience. And my lived experience is very simple. I was born in Senegal, the west coast of Africa. And right around age 2, my parents made a very difficult decision that so many African parents before them have made and continue making to this day. And that decision was to look in the eyes of a little 2-year-old girl and realize that the very best that they can do for her is to leave her behind so that they can provide her with a better life. So that's what happened. My parents left, and they left me in the care of my grandmother. And so my grandmother raised me for a few years. My parents were gone, and some 5 years later or so, once it became clear that the immigration journey has worked, they called for me to go to Europe to be reunited with them. And at that point, a very dramatic experience of my life happened. I had to leave my grandma behind, the only caretaker that I ever knew, and I left my country behind, I left my people behind, I left everything behind, and I went. I arrived in Germany, and I looked around, and I'm thinking to myself, how come they have this, and we don't? And really, all I was talking about at that point, think about it, I was only 7 years old. All I was talking about is, how come back home, when my grandma says, Magatte, it's time for your shower, I know I've got a good 45 minutes to an hour to go play some more. Why? Because I knew that grandma would have to get a stove of coal going, put a pot of water on it, wait for it to boil, then we put it into a bigger bucket, mix with cold water, and then somebody stronger than grandma would drag it to the shower area, and there at last, with a small little plastic pot, taking from the big tank to my body, I could finally proceed to take my shower. Here, mom says, Magatte, time for your shower. I'm like, where is the bucket of water? I'm not getting butt naked in this cold weather. And my mom said, come on, you silly, just jump in. I jump in, turn the knobs around, the water is coming down at the temperature that I want, at the pressure that I want. And I just thought that somebody was playing a really, really nasty case of juju on me. I was like, there's no way this is happening. But it was the same thing about everything. The paved roads, the grocery stores that had more apple types than my little brain could count. Same thing with the types of breads, and I was just like, how come they have this and we don't? And that question became the defining question of my life. I needed to know why these countries had this and we didn't. And eventually the question became, how come some countries, so many countries like mine and so many others in Africa are poor, while others like the US, Australia, New Zealand, and others are rich? What's going on here? My whole life was devoted to finding the answer to that question. Of course, along the way, I've heard it all. I've heard it all, starting with the IQ theory. Oh, darling, it's not your fault. It's just that blacks and browns are not as smart as white people, and it shows in the state of Africa, which is the home of to 90% of the representatives of this black skin color of mine. I heard people talk about malnutrition. I heard people talk about colonialism. I heard people talk about slavery. I heard people talk, and they said Africans are lazy. Africans are, low IQ. I've heard it all. But none of it made sense. Take the colonialism part. Ethiopia, never been colonized for the longest time, was a poster child for poverty in Africa. Conversely, Botswana has been colonized and has been one of the best performers since the independences in Africa. And you tell me it's about some intrinsic things about my nature that makes me so not capable, that I'm lazy, that I'm low IQ and all of that? Well, then you explain to me how come this very person that you said was inferior, the minute this person gets to different shores, that person gets to self-actualize. You explain that to me. So I'm making this conclusion that none of it makes sense. There's something else going on. And I'm looking at this equation where the only variable is the country in which these people happen to be in or not. And now I'm starting to think to myself, what is it about some countries that when you're there, everything works? And when you're not there, when you're there, nothing works. Continued on with my little life. Was in Germany. After a couple of years, we moved to France. France is where I was educated. After business school, I felt that France was too small for my ambitions. So I left France to go to the US. That was after business school. And I never regretted it. I lived my American dream. And so once I got to the US, I was a headhunter in finance at first. And then eventually, I quickly got to Silicon Valley. And there, I discovered the magic of entrepreneurship. This magic of creating something out of nothing. And there, things started to happen. You know, I was doing extremely well for myself, but eventually I will spare the story because I want us to go into the conversation. I was doing very well for myself, but at some point I had an existential crisis. I almost died during that moment of just, you know, when you're living such a life of abundance, but you've never forgotten where you came from. And you've never forgotten, and you leave constantly with the stories of people dying at the bottom of the ocean because they packed themselves into little fishermen's boats trying to cross to Europe in search for a job, and oftentimes the boat capsizes. And then you also live with stories of bodies dropping off of somewhere above England because somebody thought it would be a good idea to hide into the landing gear of a plane on their way to going to look for a job in Europe. Or you open the cargo section in Paris Charles de Gaulle and you find a frozen dead body because somebody thought it would be a good idea to hide in that, you know, cargo section, not knowing when the plane gets so high up, it gets so cold, you'll die. Or people say land route is too dangerous. They say sea route is too dangerous, air route too dangerous, let us take land route. Land route, most of the time you get stuck in Libya. Do you know what happens to us Africans in Libya? We get sold as slaves right now. My price is between $300 and $500. I ask you, if this is your experience, the stories that you live with, and they're not of people you don't know. Some of these people are friends of friends. This is very personal. How could you live a life of abundance, even if you worked really hard for it, and just forget about these people, and just forget about it? I couldn't. So this one day I just lost it. And eventually I said, God, from here on, every breath that you give me, I want to put it towards the advancement of my continent. I want to see this continent of mine finally take a decisive shift towards prosperity, and I want to see that in my lifetime. I don't know what to do. You're going to have to help me. And eventually, I became an entrepreneur. And all my businesses have in common that we have a sister company in the US and the sister company in Senegal. And I'm usually into the consumer good package. What I do is I bring back to life some of my cultural elements in the form of packaged goods, branded, 21st century, for the most sophisticated customer base in the US. So I did it once, I did it twice, I'm doing it a third time. But you know what I noticed when I did that? The first time I did it, I was shocked. I was shocked at the discrepancy in the ease of doing business between my nation and America. First, I thought to myself, I guess it's because we're rich that everything is so easy. And conversely, it's because we're poor that it's so hard to get anything done. But the minute you say that, you also think to yourself, wait a second. You're poor because you have no money, at least not enough money to take care of your basic needs. You don't have money because you don't have a source of income. What is a source of income for most of us? It's a job, isn't it? Where do jobs come from? The private sector, isn't it? Now, do you really think that the private sector happens in a vacuum? No. The private sector actually, it seems like, needs two things by now, I noticed. It needs economic freedom, meaning an enabling business environment, meaning an environment in which entrepreneurs can build businesses easily. And also it needs access to affordable, reliable, abundant energy sources. And those three have to happen together. Abundant, reliable, affordable. That's why sometimes when I hear all the nonsense about solar only and or wind, we Africans should not be sold that lie but by people who are talking nonsense. But that's a conversation for another day. So when I realized that, I'm like, but wait a second, you told me that a business environment, a friendly business environment is key for entrepreneurs so they can build jobs and businesses. Yet you just told me also that Africa, sadly, happens to be the worst region in the world to do business. We have some of the worst business environments in the world. You look at the doing business environment, all of that. And then I realized, you gotta be kidding me. And at that point I said, okay, what do we do about this? And that's eventually when I got involved in the work of reforms. Reforms to try to make it easy for businesses to be born and to be grown. And first, I got involved in the world of free market think tanks around the continent. You know, we, through Atlas Network primarily, and I see some of our great partners in the room, free market think tanks, Evan is here, I see Linda here, reach out to them. These guys are doing the Lord's work on the continent. Please keep doing whatever you're doing, and we will keep supporting you for as long as we are around. That being said, at some point I realized to myself, look, this piecemeal legislation is great, but it's going too slow. I need a major acceleration, because while we're done fixing one bad, law over here, 10 more bad ones have propped up over there. Meanwhile, I've got hundreds of millions of Africans coming to an age of work every single year on this continent with no job to get. Meanwhile, the West is closing their borders. That's a conversation for another day. So what do? We gotta find a more radical, bold solution here. And that's when I started looking into the world of startup cities. Michael and I have been through all of these moments that I told you about. For most of it, we've been together. But he has been working on some of these ideas. Michael, I think you should share with people what this is all about.
Yeah, I'll give a bit of my history as how I got into this. So 20 years ago, a little bit more than 20 years ago, I met John Mackey, the founder and CEO of Whole Foods Market. He had, of course, created grocery stores that were very successful. I'm an education entrepreneur. I'd created a series of schools, and he and I partnered to create a nonprofit to promote entrepreneurial solutions to world problems. Micro-entrepreneurship was cool, tech entrepreneurship was cool, social entrepreneurship was cool. And when I started looking around the world at entrepreneurial solutions to world problems, I soon ran into a man who had been involved in the free zone industry for 20-some years, a man named Mark Fraser. And he said, look, zones are going to be the fastest way to alleviate global poverty, and not just alleviate, to create global prosperity. We were already at the point where the Chinese special economic zones were showing how powerful they were. Early on, people sort of despised zones around the world. There are a lot of people, export processing zones had kind of this sleazy reputation. 2008, I had a conference with Bill Easterly, a leading development economist. He admitted development economists had just ignored zones. They just seemed kind of marginal. I met with somebody at the World Bank around the same time, 2007, 2008. They were just kind of beginning to focus on zones. So most of development economics had focused on nation-state reforms. But several zone industry insiders said, no, zones are the way. I also worked with Bob Haywood, who was the ED of the World Economic Processing Zones Association. And they said, look, nation-state reform is just too hard. Within a zone, this is repeating some of what Mark Letter mentioned earlier. I knew Mark when he was a graduate student studying this. Mark had one of the first PhDs on zones, by the way. So zones allow for these reforms in a localized area, so you don't have to change everything, insofar as there are vested interests in current legislation, in the current legal and regulatory structure. Zones allow you to do kind of an end run around those. So in a zone, especially greenfield site with little or no business or residents, there's nobody to oppose what you do. In essence, you can have a new start. The other thing that was happening in the early aughts was people realized early zones were about tax incentives, reduced taxes, reduced regulations, or streamlined regulations. But Shrog mentioned earlier the DIFC. Around 2004, the Dubai International Financial Center was a pioneering initiative because they took common law, in 110 acres in Dubai, they created a common law jurisdiction within a sea of UAE Sharia law. And they did that because, of course, common law is best for finance. You look at Hong Kong, Singapore, Chicago, New York, London, these are all, Sydney, they're all common law jurisdictions. So if you want to have world-class common financial center, you install common law. Think of it like software. So, if you're running one piece of software, your computer, you want better piece of software. Just get the operating system that works. Be totally pragmatic. But I think it was incredibly visionary because we realized then that the nation state and the legal system do not need to be identical. Let's be pragmatic and use whatever legal system allows us to create prosperity and success as fast as possible. Later, I got involved in the early version of what later became the Próspera Zone. Paul Romer had been involved in that along with some Hondurans. Octavio Sanchez was local Honduran. And there they were, again, creating a common law zone within Honduras, which was Spanish civil law. And the first version didn't work out. Long, interesting story. Magatte and I could both tell a lot of stories. But the new legislation was passed, and what became Próspera and several other zones came out of that. And now Próspera is the most developed new governance system in the world. It has a common law jurisdiction. It has choice of law, choice of venue, and choice of regulatory system. So on the radical front, within Próspera, if you can pick any OECD healthcare regulation, and so if there is a, say, medication that's legal in Europe but not legal in the US, you can pick the one that's legal in Europe or vice versa, or Japan or wherever. And I think this choice of regulatory system is really visionary. So Próspera has kind of been at the frontier of creating new law and governance within zones that optimize for business and really innovation, ongoing continuous innovation. I see Próspera as the software system for zones in the 21st century. There are other competitors. We want lots of competitors. I want this to be one of the most important industries in the 21st century, because if we can create zones across, say, Africa that are better than Singapore quality, better than Dubai quality, better than Próspera quality, that's the path to Africa becoming prosperous as fast as possible. Before handing it back to Magatte, talk a little bit about Próspera Africa specifically. I want to highlight the fact that in China, within 30 years, average urban wages have gone up 10x. They've gone from poor to middle class. For anyone in the room, but especially for Africans, imagine if your children were earning 10 times as much as you were, and it became routine for everybody in your country to be 10 times as prosperous as they are today. That's the power of zones.
Thank you, Michael. So you can imagine that once and again, I was on the front seat watching everything that was happening in Honduras when Michael was working on getting the law passed, and there were some protests. I was there. So Próspera Africa very much is to tap into that expertise and use this opportunity to take it to the next level. And just so that for those of you who are not aware or familiar with this, I think I really want to stress it out. Próspera zones are not countries inside a country. You might hear some of those things, some other people describing theirs like that. That's not us. What we do is we recognize that the business environment is the biggest problem, and that's all we proceed to work on. We don't touch family law, we don't touch immigration law, we don't touch defense law, we don't touch any of those things because those things are privy to the sovereign nation. And none of our business being involved in that. But what we do, working together with these countries, is saying, hey, here we're going to create the best business environment that the world has ever seen. And I really want you guys to hear this. And you can say you hear this, you heard it here first. I feel like us Africans, whether we admit it or not, we have a hard time thinking of ourselves as the leaders, as the tomorrow's leaders of the world. We say it sounds nice, but I know deep down and in private circles, we don't believe any of it. And that's a problem. That's a problem. I'm not going to be happy with us. I think Sharad was saying it, we're just going to be, the best in Africa. That's not enough because the best of the laggers, excuse me, what is that? It's still mediocrity. I don't want that. We are going to be the best in the world. And that's why I connected with Próspera Africa, because I looked around and this is the only team that can get this done. And so that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. And we're going to focus on pipeline creation. I don't want our young people to just be, I loved your Endeavor presentation today, but my only problem there was the goal for us should not be to try and be cheaper than China. That thing, I think, is great. China can do whatever it wanted to do, India and all of that. I propose that we leapfrog. I propose that we're going to be getting the jobs around AI, we're going to get the jobs around healthcare, we're going to get all of that. Guess what, guys? We're going to leapfrog. Just like M-Pesa leapfrogged, in the banking system, we are going to leapfrog. Just like we leapfrogged ahead of the landlines to cell phones directly, we are going to do that. We have the greatest youth that we've ever seen. Our people are not stupid, regardless of what people can say. And so this is also what I love about the way we're doing these projects. We're creating pipeline. And so I'm telling you, 20 years from now, mark it in your calendars. You can say Magatte told us so on June 12, 2025. She did say that within the next 20 years, because what we have discovered is that these things happen faster and faster as people go. When the first one went, I think it took 30, 35 years, then 20, 25 years, and we believe that we're going to do it below 20 years. So if God keeps me alive, I might see my dream. And even if I don't see it, we're going to do enough so I die knowing that the boat called Africa has taken a decisive shift towards prosperity. And why do I say that? Because people are like, oh my God, come on, Africa, 54 nation, what are you talking about? Yes, I know why am I saying this? Because all I need is one success story. That's it. One success story, the rest replicate. And you will be happy to know that we're very close to it. We're very close, very soon to being able to announce our first nation where we're going to be doing this. And from there, I think the world is going to watch and see what we do. And unless we mess it up royally, which I don't think we will, I think this is going to be the beginning of the future of this continent. And we, Africans, will become global co-creators of innovation and prosperity in the world. That's what I see in my dreams when I go to bed. Thank you. And that's what we're going to have. But for that, guys, you have to believe in ourselves. Stop thinking small. Stop thinking that the only thing we can take is the scraps. So that's why when we go for models, we don't go for models that are 20, 30, 50 years old. That's old. We build the future.
So I want to make it clear that this is a big lift, and in particular, it requires legislation. We've looked at some countries where maybe the existing special economic zone legislation could be tweaked, but realistically, to do a good job of this, we need legislation. In Honduras, there's been legislation that's been very controversial. The first version of the legislation was declared unconstitutional by the Honduran Supreme Court. The second version of the legislation, the current Honduran government, which is Marxist, is trying to destroy it. There's litigation, it's very complicated, it's a mess. So we need legislation, and the legislation is not easy to get passed. Our expectation, and Magatte can talk to this, is Latin America in general, and Honduras in particular, very Marxist. Magatte says that basically Africans just want to get rich. There's few Marxist intellectuals still around, but there's not the anti-capitalism here that there seems to be in Latin America. So we've been in contact with about a dozen African governments and are at various levels of working towards possible legislation. But to give you a sense for just how radical legislation would be, in order to have the choice of regulatory feature that Próspera Honduras has, we need a general repealer on the zones, which means all law and regulation within that zone would be repealed. Because otherwise you couldn't use, say, the Japanese healthcare or FDA equivalent or the European medical, whatever it is, or financial. If we want to replicate Dubai Financial Center, we need to repeal all existing financial legislation within a country. This is one of the reasons why Magatte emphasized, it's not sovereign only with respect to commercial law, but with respect to commercial law, we need pretty radical legislation to have the freedom to pick best of class law, best of class regulation in every sector.
Very true. And so for those of you who, like me, for whom English is only your fourth language, when we talk about a general repealer, the best way to think about it is what it is. It's a tool of the law where basically all it is a tool that allows you to erase all the current laws. And in the case, like Michael said, it allows you to erase all the business laws because we know they're cumbersome. And the reason why you need to do that is, have you guys gotten ever into a situation where the home is so crooked, everything is falling apart, the plans are wrong, everything is bad, and you know that the best thing to do is to tear it down and start over rather than try to renovate? Well, that's the state of many of our nations when it comes to business law. That's how bad the thing is. Or any of you who works in software, software is just that. It's code, lines and lines and lines of code, millions of lines of code. And we know that the more of lines of code you have, the more complicated it's going to be, and then things get cumbersome, and then sometimes when you have a mistake somewhere, you don't know where it is. Well, that's what our laws are. I think somebody said earlier you needed a license somewhere in some country, I don't remember which one it was. 30 licenses, did he say? That's nonsense. And the problem is, the minute you try to touch to any of those licenses, you just have an enemy, because somebody is benefiting from that license being there. So that's why in these zones, you need to start over. And what I like about this approach is that you're giving due respect to the citizens of the land by just saying, hey, over here, we're going to try something different, and you decide if it's good enough for you or not. And the way you show that is by coming in. So it's all voluntary. And that's what I like about these models. Michael?
Yeah, I want to kind of go back and emphasize, in the abstract, Magatte mentioned most African nations are ranked in the bottom half of the Doing Business Index. There are a few exceptions. Mauritius is top 10 or top 20. Mauritius started with zones, by the way, and it's now about as prosperous as some of the poorer countries of Europe. So Mauritius is already becoming middle class. But because, as Magatte mentioned earlier, she does business both in the US and in Senegal, she experiences I would say, the nonsensical regulations concretely every day. I'll give you one sort of shocking example. She sometimes has sent, $1,000 back and forth, and she has employees who are investigated by the bank in Senegal for sending, $1,000. How can you do business? When she wants to lay off an employee in her factory, maybe demand is not high this month, she needs to lay somebody off. She needs permission from the Senegalese government to lay somebody off. People have to have certain qualifications. From an American standard, and by the way, the US is not at the top of the Doing Business Index. Singapore is, Denmark, New Zealand. We like to point out for people who think this is political, look, Denmark is regarded as a welfare state, but it has one of the best business environments in the world. But the best business environments, you get online to start a business, in 20 minutes you've got a business going. It's that easy. Whereas in much of Africa, I describe it as swimming through molasses. So any entrepreneurs in the room, if you want to do all kinds of things, I don't know Kenya in particular, but I think Kenya might be in the top half of doing business. I think it might be 60 or 70, so not as bad as many other places. But instead of being difficult to do business, it needs to be super easy. You think of Amazon one click. In tech companies, faster, better, cheaper, constantly. Everybody in tech is faster, better, cheaper every millisecond. And we need business environments run by tech-oriented people that are faster, better, cheaper, constantly.
So, yeah, we're going to do Q&A, but before we get to the Q&A, I really, if there is anything that I hope we left you with today, many of you are a self-chosen group of people who understand these things that we're talking about. But even if you understand them, oftentimes I realize that many Africans are not sufficiently appreciating how disastrous our business environments are. They really are not. Oftentimes I see people like, which Africa are you talking about? It's easy to do business here. Yeah, when you pay bribes, but should it be the way? Should it be that way? No. You're never going to get the best business people when you continue doing that way. If you want the best business people in the world, you have to remember the best business people in the world, the ones that you want to work with, they are like me and others. They're conscious capitalists. They're here for a win-win-win. But if you make the situation so bad that it's a zero-sum game, you're only going to get people who love to play that game. These are not the people that are going to help Africa leapfrog ahead. You have yet to see the best business partners that exist right now. We establish these zones, they will show their faces. That's what I wanted to say. So let us spend time on that.
Yeah, maybe if people want to line up for Q&A, I want to make a quick comment. Other people say, oh, look, there are lots of entrepreneurs in Africa, but of course most of them are in the informal sector. And the problem with being in the informal sector is you don't typically have legal rights over anything. You don't have insurance. You're not protected by the legal system. And while you can get away with being in the informal sector, if the government wants to attack you, you can be prosecuted, fined, and in some cases imprisoned. There's a book about the U.S. called 3 Felonies a Day, about how any significant business person in the U.S. is probably committing 3 felonies a day. I would say any informal sector entrepreneur in Africa is probably committing 3 felonies a day. So you're vulnerable to attacks. So this is why it's important to have access to the legal system where you can have a legal, legitimate business that has property rights, protection from the government, insurance, all of those standard things. Does anybody have any questions? We've got about 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'm Janet. I'm representing C7 cities. And what you're saying is very interesting, but I'd like for you to define economic freedom in areas where we know bureaucracy, corruption, land ownership are blocking opportunities, especially for the youths and all the skilled laborers.
So, guys, when we talk about economic freedom, the best way to describe it is really what we're saying. It's a business environment. So if any of you were to pull up the Doing Business Index ranking of a World Bank, then you'll see that they tracked, at least back in the days, they used to track 10 indicators, and within the 10 indicators, you have sub-indicators. And so they'll go from looking at how many days, how much money, how many places you have to, how many hoops you have to jump through to legally register your business, to get various types of licenses, look at the banking system, the finance rules and regulations. They would look at the labor laws. They would look at the tax code. They look at all of these things and see how it pans out. And basically, you need to have all of these different places to be at a critical mass of acceptability. And then that's how we kind of measure the level of economic freedom you have, right? And so when you say, how do you get economic freedom in places where they have lots of corruption? By the way, I wanna make this emphasis here, because oftentimes when you ask people, what is the biggest problem of Africa? People will say, corruption. Yeah, of course, corruption. Why? Do you know what corruption is? Corruption is simply a symptom of too many laws and regulations, of too many senseless laws and regulation. If you subject me to 30 licenses, but I think he was talking about earlier to have I think it was something about tourism, like to have a tourism business, you needed to go through 30 licenses. If this country only asks for 5 licenses, it's still too many, but it's still better than the country that's asking for 30. Don't we agree? But even the country that's asking for 5, each one of those 5 is one place where you will need to pay a bribe in order to move to the next step. And so we're saying, get rid of these licenses. Because every time there's a regulation, it means an opportunity or a need for you to pay a bribe in these places. So what do? The best way to do it? Remove them. No friction between me and the officials. So that's what we're trying to say. So in these zones, what we're doing is we're starting with a clean slate. We're removing all of these things. And so where you normally would have to have 30 licenses, you probably have 1 or 2. It's very straightforward. You don't have to deal even with a legislator. It's online, so you don't have a dude over there deciding whether or not you're going to have your license because maybe you paid, or in the lady's situation, maybe you slept with that person. Let us be frank, this type of stuff happens. I've been doing business on the continent. You would be surprised over crap that I get on a regular basis. So, but here you don't have to, because it's all computerized. You don't have to rely on anybody to enter your information, put the stuff that you need, you're done, you have your paperwork within a few seconds or minutes, and you move on. So that's how we propose to do that. So, but you see the relationship between lack of economic freedom and potential for corruption.
My name is Joe Kechai. Africa Urban Lab, which is working towards the issue of trying to do the expansion within various municipalities, various counties, and I'm also the former mayor. What you have said, I quite agree with you, but I don't want to make it political, because being a mayor definitely must have been a politician. But the problem with what we are saying, you're giving very good theory. You're giving us something that can be able to be done, to be implemented. But the problem with us here is we come with good ideas, And you take example of Singapore and other areas which I'm told they were at par with Africa 60, 70 years ago. Look at where they are. They had the same dream, and we also had the same dream. But look at the comparison. Where do you think we go wrong in Africa when it comes to try to implement whatever we're talking? And also the bureaucracy, which also becomes so difficult. Is that vision that you have is going to be something that is going to be a new agenda for Africa? Because if it does, then definitely we're going the right way.
Your question makes me feel like I have not made my case very well. What we do is we create these zones, and in our case, these are Próspera type zones, where using primarily a key tool called the general repealer, in these specific zones, we get to start over when it comes to the legislation, when it comes to the business environment. Then we proceed to design the best laws that exist. This is in a way what Singapore has done and the people of Dubai have done. At some point, you got to start somewhere. And the starting somewhere is very simple. You come to this table, it's full of all of these things. And then let's say this whole stage is a country. And well, this whole country is ruled by the same laws, by the same regulations. There's all of this corruption going on. It's all complicated. Then what you say is like, okay, this table is going to be the zone on which we're going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this. These are all of these laws, regulations. This is like your 30 licenses. This is like, for the banking system, your money can get in, but you can't get it out, and all of this nonsense. Down. Labor laws, you can't hire people or fire them without government's approval. Down. This is like tax code. It's so complicated. It's worth truckloads of laws. Down. This is like, property rights are, you have to jump through this hoop, that hoop, but out here, clean. Clean. Do you think I'm going to come back and put back these things in here? No. This is clean. And from this standpoint, I'm like, tax code. Let's look around the world about the best tax code. Whether it's in Singapore, whether it's in Dubai, whatever. Let's look at the best one, and let's see how it could be improved upon, because we don't just copy-paste. And we see also how it would best work in this environment. And then that's it. The tax code now looks like this. Oh. And we do that about everything. That's how we're going to do it. And we start with one zone, see how it works, and we learn lessons from that and move on to the next.
I would add that it's much more likely to be successful if they're privately developed. There's a literature on zones, and generally government-developed zones are less likely to be successful than private. And part of this is the private developers need to make money. And one of the primary business models for private developer of zones is land value gains. And so, Shenzhen land values were very low in 1980, now some of the highest in the world. So if a zone developer does this right, they will make money through real estate gains. And so I think one of the problems with many zones around the world has been government-developed and poor incentives. So we don't have time to get into the details. Again, Mark Lutter wrote a dissertation on zones. He knows the literature. But it's really important to get the incentives right.
Right, thank you. My name is TJ Enos Airo, a practitioner of law. I practice at the firm of AAA LLP. So my question goes towards, you've mentioned maybe looking at the tool, the general repealer. And I'm a bit curious, maybe is there consideration for model laws such as those that are under the UNCITRAL model laws? For instance, the one that is appreciative of international sale of goods. So instead of looking at tools such as the general repealer, is there consideration for model laws? I know, for instance, in Kenya, that privity of contract, that two people can contract, they're at liberty to do so, and they're able to adopt such a model. Is there consideration for such as opposed to just thinking around repealing? Maybe the follow-up question would be, when you're considering, I know, and it's a brief one, it's tied to that one. What's your thought process in looking at a jurisdiction and saying these laws are favorable, and what's your thought process in going towards these are the favorable laws in this jurisdiction that would make sense towards business per se?
Yeah, officially we're out of time, and it sounds like a level of sophistication I don't have time to get into, but one of the most critical things is we always look for a local legal team. Because as you can imagine, this is actually a tremendous amount of legal work to get this right. It is a way of stitching one system onto another system, and exactly how you connect the two systems is non-trivial, to say the least. So yeah, without kind of knowing the answer to your question, if we worked in Kenya, we'd hire people like you and spend a lot of time working to figure out exactly what we keep, what we don't, what's the interface is, how to make sure there's clarity and an efficient system across the boundary.
I believe that there is 3 bottlenecks in the continent which are really sensitive and which block the implementation. The first one is too much studies. Too much studies. And I went on mission in Botswana, Zambia, in several countries, and I believe that these studies represent a bottleneck. The second one is too much meetings and public-private dialogues, while there is never follow-up on the recommendations provided by the private sector to move forward. And the last one may be too much training. I'm surprised that a lot of organizations submit a training program to managers in the continent. I am working with a lot of small businesses with top managers coming from the continent, and they are tied by training. So I think it's time to have less meetings, less seminars, less studies, and to go on implementation, means on the ground. Thanks.
So I'm Avnish Avasti. I'm from India and I'm a bureaucrat with a 37-year track record. So I just wanted to suggest, I have too much of white hair and I would go by what he has said on implementation. You just can't wish away all the laws. You have to have ease of doing business, use technology, use self-declaration, use automatic systems to bring things on the place. But the ultimate answer to all of this is a very robust judicial system also. So, I mean, in democracies of our nature, with such a large population, so many new projects, policies, all of it coming in place, the laws have to be simplified, no doubt about it. Use technology for simplifying the mechanisms for application and getting it all cleared, and put a timeline so that there is deemed approval beyond 30 days. So that's what we have been doing in India and in our state of Uttar Pradesh.
Okay, thank you everybody.
Yeah.
It's been a blast.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.